watch it later. And we have a special guest, Lewis Irvine, who is coming to us, even though he's a Scotland native, he is coming to us from Marseille in France, which those of you who read The Count of Monte Cristo should remember that location. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about Scotland and Ireland and their literary heritage. So he is a tour guide during non-COVID times, but also he does some really cool work with human rights and refugees. And I told him that Houston also has a proud tradition of welcoming refugees. We're the top city in the country for that. So please give your attention to Lewis.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Lewis. I think my introduction has just been made. I don't really need to remake it. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to be with you guys for about half an hour. In a minute, I'm going to click over to my slides and I'm going to just show some images while I talk. But really only for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Scotland and Ireland and some things to see there. And maybe a little bit also about writers that come from those places or what culture around literature is there. And then I guess we're going to make space for questions. But just before I go into those slides, I just wanted to say that obviously it's incredibly optimistic that in 15, 20 minutes I'm going to cover much ground. So you have to forgive me. And if there's anything that piques your interest in that period, store it in your head. And then afterwards, when we do a Q&A, you're welcome to ask those questions. Okay. Thank you. One face. Thank you. I appreciate that. If when I come back, basically when a second face. Great. This is really a good team effort. When I click into my images, I'm not going to be able to see anything apart from them for 15, 20 minutes. You got like 15, 20 minutes to get ready to show me your faces in the Q&A. But for now, the next 15, 20 minutes, you're chill. You can do whatever you like. Obviously pay attention, but off camera. All right, so I'm going to try and share my screen just now. And then I think what I'm going to need is I'm going to need Elizabeth to tell me when it's good.
It's good.
Is that just there? That's good. You can see that map.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm going to do almost no history today. I've done a bunch of these where we've talked a lot about history, but this is going to be a very short little discussion. I just wanted to start off with a tiny ancient history thing, which is kind of a little bit interesting, or maybe would help you a little bit to understand some of the similarities between these countries you can see and some of the differences. So this is obviously a map of the UK and Ireland. The UK, the United Kingdom, makes up Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And then next to it, you have the Republic of Ireland, which is a separate country. Okay. And so we're looking at this map here. And I don't know, I'm sure you will have heard this word, but you will have heard that Scotland and Ireland and Wales are Celtic countries. And so I guess I like to start any kind of history or talking about these places by asking sort of what that means and why they're Celtic countries and why England is not a Celtic country. And so basically, really a long time ago, like 2,000 plus years ago, the indigenous people to all of these islands were Celts, okay? And so Celts are these they were a really diverse ethnicity of people that lived in Europe for a very, very long time. And were spread out all over lots and lots and lots of different parts of Europe, but it's specifically in Western Europe, okay? And they lived in a very sort of tribal society. This was pre-Christians, they were pagan, they were very connected to nature. And one of their big enemies was the Romans, right? And so this history of why Ireland and Scotland and Wales are a bit similar and they're quite different from England kind of starts with the Romans. Because if you look at this map, the Romans, when they invaded nearly 2,000 years ago, they arrived into London in the bottom right-hand corner, and they invaded and they pushed north, 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 and they pushed west, 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 west. And eventually the Celts kind of retreated into Scotland and into Wales. And the Romans couldn't really get into Scotland, so they had enough trying to push that border north, and they built a wall called Hadrian's Wall. And they never really conquered the whole of Scotland. They couldn't really get into Wales. The terrain, again, it was a bit too tough for them. The people were too tough. So they dug a big ditch. It was called Offa's Dyke, sorry. And they never even got to Ireland. Okay, and so over the next kind of 100 years, the Romans really settled England. And so at its base, 2,000 years ago, England was settled by a kind of foreign invader in a way that Scotland Ireland and Wales never were. Okay. And so, whilst you wouldn't really see that necessarily in the differences between people nowadays, at our base, the culture in Scotland, we kind of have more in common with the Irish than we do with the English. Okay. And historically, that has been a bit of a David and a Goliath story, right? Like a lot of the money and the power has been in England, and there's been a lot of kind of bad blood between England and Scotland and between England and Ireland. So the Celtic countries, we kind of team up a little bit. Some of the legacies of that, if I look at this next image, it's quite interesting. You can see this is one of the legacies is the languages that are still spoken, which are Celtic languages. So in Scotland, you have Gaelic. In Ireland, you have in Scotland, you have Gaelic. In Ireland, you have Gaelic. In Wales, you have Welsh. And you also have in the very eastern tip of England, the very western tip, sorry, Cornish. And in the very western tip of France, you have Breton. And you have another one a bit further south on the very western coast of Galicia. And I like this map because this shows you the ways in which kind of Roman invasion pushed these languages and these people to the very, very, very furthest corners of these countries. So we still have these languages today in Scotland and in Ireland, Gaelic and Gaelic. And I guess one other way is that in Celtic times, the religious people of the Celts, they were the Druids, okay? And one of the things they wanted people to do is they didn't want people to write down language. So the Druids, they believed that language was very sacred, okay? So there was no written culture in Celtic culture. And if you don't write down your stories, how do you pass them on to your children, right? How do you pass lessons learned on? You pass them on through storytelling and through songs and poems. So this is also one of the reasons why Scotland and Ireland have these rich storytelling cultures, right? So we have these rich literary cultures, but we also have cultures of storytelling, songs, long poems, which go back really, really thousands and thousands of years. All right, so here's a little small pixelated map of Scotland. This is a really bad map of Scotland. I'm sorry that I chose this one now that I see it on full screen. Scotland is quite a small country. It's got about 5 million people in it. And nearly 2 million of those are kind of grouped into the two big cities in the lowlands down at the bottom there, Glasgow and Edinburgh. Edinburgh is the capital city. Glasgow is the kind of working class industrial beating heart of Scotland. And so you have these three broad regions in Scotland. You have the lowlands, where you have Glasgow and Edinburgh. You have the highlands, which is everything up north, where there's a kind of lots of wilderness, lots of very wild places. And then you have the islands. So lowlands, highlands, islands. What we're going to talk about today is mostly we're going to talk about Edinburgh. So this is Edinburgh. This is the city where I grew up and where I lived until I was 17 or 18. And then I moved to Glasgow, the other big city. And so Edinburgh, maybe you're looking at this. I mean, this, I can imagine you could not get architecture more different from Texas than even what you can see in this photo. I grew up there, so it's kind of hard sometimes to see the place that you grew up as looking, you know, romantic or interesting or anything but the place where you grew up. But I guess my job helps me a little bit sometimes to see these places a bit with other people's eyes. But so this is Edinburgh anyway at night. And you can see up on the big hill there, Edinburgh is really dominated by this thing, which is Edinburgh Castle, which is this massive, totally sort of impenetrable mound of volcanic rock in the middle of Edinburgh, on which there's a huge big castle. And so actually Edinburgh has been a city or a sort of settlement, something sort of becoming a city, for almost 1,000 years. People have had some kind of castle or some kind of fortress up on that big rock for almost 1,000 years, since the 10th century. And in fact, there's still a 10th century church up there, which is quite amazing. So you have this big castle up at one end, and then the castle, here you can see the castle in the background, because this photo is taken from Arthur's Seat, which is a big, giant, dormant volcano in the middle of Edinburgh. So it's a nice place for like running. People play sport there. You can go for walks. It's kind of like a big park. But what it is, in fact, is a big dormant volcano. And the rock on which sits Edinburgh Castle is also from this volcanic explosion, which happened, you know, hundreds and hundreds of millions of years ago. And so you have these two kind of high points in Edinburgh. You have up here where we are on this photo, Arthur's Seat, and then over there in the distance you can see the castle, which really takes the sort of centre place in the old town of Edinburgh. But the castle's up high, and the castle has a very famous street which leads down away from it, and that street is called the Royal Mile. So anybody that's ever been to Edinburgh will definitely have been on the Royal Mile. It's in fact just a little bit longer than 1 mile. It's a Scots mile, which is a little bit longer. And at the top you have Edinburgh Castle, and at the bottom you have Holyrood Palace, which is one of the Queen's homes in Scotland. Anyway, I'll come back here for a second to the Royal Mile. With regards to literature and performing arts and creative stuff, Edinburgh is also host every August to the Fringe Festival, which is the world's biggest performing arts festival. So there's something like 50,000 different performances over a period of a month. And for example, this whole street, this whole area is cordoned off. There's absolutely no driving on it. And there's lots of street performers and poetry readings and theatre. And it's a city with a very lively theatre and creative culture. And in fact, in terms of its ability to have like a literary scene or an art scene, there was a huge actual enlightenment in Edinburgh, which happened in the 18th century, 18th and beginning of the 19th century, where it was really a place very famous for its university, famous for lots of philosophers and thinkers. And there's a bit of a kind of joke about these two main cities in Scotland, that Edinburgh had the Enlightenment while Glasgow had the Industrial Revolution. So Edinburgh is this city that you think of as being very sort of literary, very intellectual, very university-like, and then Glasgow was much more left-wing, working class, lots of trade unions, manufacture, etc., etc. So then we have the Royal Mile, which would have been the sort of backbone of the old town, certainly in medieval times. And at the bottom you have this place, Holyrood Palace, which is where the Queen lives in one of her places where she lives in Scotland. Yes, we still have a Queen. Me, personally, I don't believe there's a way to be neutral when talking about the royal family. Some people love them. Some people really hate them. Me, personally, I'm going to share my personal position. Lucky you. Me, personally, I'm very against the monarchy. I don't think it's right that we have a monarchy. I'm happy they can stay in their big houses and they can have their nice life and do whatever they do, but I don't think they should still have political power. I think it's very backwards that there's still a monarchy in the United Kingdom. If you have any questions about that, we can talk about that later. But anyway, there's a lot of people in Scotland that also feel like that. Certainly in Ireland, they feel like that because they chucked out the Queen in the beginning of the 20th century, which we'll talk about a bit later. Anyway, this is one of the places where the Queen hangs out when she is in Scotland. Often when you're on guided tours, you look at this building and people talk about this and talk about the Queen and once she blew her nose here and she took her dogs for a walk, and everybody sort of fawns, and people don't ever really talk about the fact that on the other side of the road, literally just next door, is this, which is the Scottish Parliament. Okay, so this is really like a building for today and for tomorrow, and this for me is really a building from yesterday. And I do find it a bit of a shame that there is a real tendency that we look much more towards this kind of thing when we visit Scotland, towards these old traditions, and we don't look at the ways in which Scotland actually is a very modern, young and dynamic and politically progressive country. Okay, so Scotland is very, very politically different from England, as is Ireland, and it's very progressive and young and open-minded to new things, as kind of expressed by the modernity of the Parliament building. This Parliament building was a bit of an outrage, actually. It came in sort of 8 bazillion times the budget it was supposed to come in at, and people were very, very upset. And these kind of things that look like hair dryers on the front, they're supposed to be curtains opening back. It's supposed to be about transparency in government. There's also, as I'm sure you know, a big movement in Scotland for people wanting independence. And a lot of that happened in and around this building. That would be independence from the UK. For some of us also, that would be independence from the Crown. I'm showing you this because I was supposed to lean a little bit towards literature and talking about books and writers today. And one of Edinburgh's most famous writers was definitely J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter book series. J.K. Rowling, there's this big mythology about where she wrote the first one and how she didn't have any money. And all she had was enough money for a cup of tea, and she would sit and drink cups of tea and then write. And this was the cafe, supposedly, where she would do that. The irony is that by the time she was writing the last book, she was writing in this building, where she had the entire last floor as a suite, the Balmoral Hotel. So obviously she forgot her impoverished roots a little bit. But it's interesting when you go to Edinburgh because Actually, you can walk around the city and you can see lots of things which definitely would have inspired her in the writing of Harry Potter. So, for example, just next to this coffee shop in Greyfriars Graveyard, there's a lot of graves you can see which have the names of people which we know now are characters in Harry Potter. There's a private school next to here as well. In fact, where her kids go now, or her kids did go, which was said to be the inspiration for Hogwarts, etc., etc. She's an interesting figure in Scotland as well. She's actually a bit controversial. She gave a lot of money to the campaign against Scottish independence, and so a lot of people kind of took against her. And also, certainly this year, she's been embroiled in pretty high-scale transphobia scandals in the UK. So she's a bit of a sort of big, large, and looming public figure. Well, here is a beautiful little old building in the old town. This is Edinburgh Writers' Museum. So there's like I said, there's a sort of very rich tradition of writers. There's a rich tradition of thinkers, really, and philosophers and economists and all kinds of people involved in culture production. So you have some of the big people from really back in the day, like the David Humes and the Adam Smiths, who were writing books, but not necessarily literary books. And then you have the kind of big 19th century heavyweights of literature that come from Edinburgh, the people like Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote, for example, Treasure Island, or Sir Walter Scott, for example, who wrote Rob Roy or the Waverley novels. And then in the 20th century, you have people like Muriel Spark, J.K. Rowling, Irvine Welsh, Ian Rankin. I feel like I'm missing other people. Well, anyway, those are some famous writers from Edinburgh. Obviously, I don't have that much time. I can't show you so many different things. I'm supposed to show you some things from Ireland as well. Just a couple more things in Scotland I wanted to say is that there's also a lot of other interesting things nearby to Edinburgh, not very far away. This is Stirling Castle. And often when we do EF tours, if there's going to be a couple of days in Edinburgh, there's usually a day when we head out to Stirling Castle, which is an interesting sort of historic site to see, and also nice to get out and breathe some country air and see what life is like outside the big cities. There's also, I mean, I'm sure I don't even need to say this, but totally endless riches of the countryside in Scotland. So this is Glencoe, which is probably one of my favorite places to be in Scotland. I can only promise you that no photos do it justice, or that it doesn't look as good in photos as it does in real life. But this is Glencoe. And so, I mean, we've literally just talked about Edinburgh. There's multiple other cities, lots of other places to go. But those are some little things in and around Edinburgh that are interesting sometimes for people to visit. And of course, also, I know that maybe in Texas you would try and claim that. I've certainly been to a lot of places in the Deep South where they've tried to claim that it's the home of the deep fried candy bar. But I'm afraid it is not true. Scotland is the home of the deep fried candy bar. This is a deep fried Mars bar. And we eat this with fries. It's really, you guys don't call them Mars bars, do you? You call them something else. Like a Snickers, but with no nuts, and then deep fried and battered. And next to it is a can of Iron Brew, which is our national soda. People think our national drink is whiskey, but actually it's Iron Brew.
A Twix?
Like a Twix, but with no biscuit. I don't know if that helps. No crumbliness.
Oh,
no cookie. Sorry, you guys don't say biscuit. Oh, I'm confusing everything here. And Iron Brew, this can here, this is kind of our national drink. Scotland is one of only 2 countries in the whole world where Coca-Cola is not the best-selling soft drink. The other one is Peru. I don't know if there's any Peruvians here, where they have Inca Cola. And weirdly, I had a Peruvian group once who told me that Iron Brew tastes very much like Inca Cola. All right, I've already been talking for longer than I should have been, just about that. So we're going to hop over the Irish Sea and we're going to go to Ireland. This is, again, quite a funny map because they've kind of blanked out Northern Ireland as if it doesn't exist. And I think in lots of moments, both parts of this partitioned country would like to pretend that aspects of the other one don't exist. I definitely don't have time to talk about the partition of Ireland today, but I will just say for now that it's a contested partition, and you have this northern chunk, which is in the UK and still under the Queen and under British governance. And then you have what's on this map in the yellow, which is the Republic of Ireland. And Republic obviously means with no Queen. Okay, so in Ireland or in Scotland or in England, to say you're a Republican means that you're against the Queen, and it's usually a left-wing or a liberal or a progressive political tradition, which is kind of the opposite from where you guys are. So I'm going to show you and tell you we're in Dublin now. A couple of things about Dublin. It's interesting because Edinburgh's a bit more like showy, like this big dramatic castle, this volcano, these dramatic sunsets. Dublin is a little bit less showy. You can also see the poverty more in Dublin than you can in Edinburgh, or certainly in the city centre of Edinburgh. But But it's, I mean, a really, really beautiful place. Lots of interesting buildings, lots of really interesting history, but less sort of big, dramatic skyscapes. You know, there aren't really the same kind of very old buildings. There's not very many medieval buildings, for example, in Dublin. But here's a view of the River Liffey. However, in Dublin, you do have this ability to see history in an amazing way. So this, for example, is the General Post Office. It's in the very centre of Dublin, and this was the site in 1916 of the Easter Rising, which was basically an armed revolution against British rule. And in fact, today, it's a working post office. You can go up close. You can't really see it in this photo, but those pillars are absolutely full of bullet holes from that rising. Here's a photo of the same street, O'Connell Street, in 1916. And on the end of this street, there's this statue of Daniel O'Connell, the great emancipator he was known as, who was a Catholic civil rights icon in the 19th century in Ireland. At the time he was born, he was a Catholic. At the time he was born, Catholics didn't even have the right to be educated or to vote. And by the time he died as a Catholic, he'd been Lord Mayor of Dublin twice, and Catholics had the right to vote. He was a very good friend of Frederick Douglass also. I mean, a really, really interesting human rights and social justice campaigner, Daniel O'Connell. But for example, this statue, the angels on the bottom of the statue, if you can see them, they're full of bullet holes. So you can still see the bullet holes today from the British guns in 1916 when the Irish had their revolution against the British. Dublin's very young and very trendy. This is the Temple Bar. It's an area that's full of sort of cafes and restaurants and bars and street performers. Again, it kind of shares that thing with Edinburgh in that it's really a place where there's lots and lots of music, lots of creativity, a big sort of creative scene. Also a very young population and a big sort of college population. And so normally a much younger, more progressive sort of crowd of people living in Dublin. Here's the biggest university in Dublin, Trinity College, which... yeah, I mean, it is usually somewhere also when we go with groups, it's somewhere that we visit, and we usually visit it to go and see the Book of Kells. I don't know if you ever heard of this. It's an 8th century copy of the Gospel, so of the Bible, but made in the 8th century, so 1200 years ago. And so they didn't have paper, it's made on vellum, which is calf skin. And so often we go and visit that when we go to Dublin, and that's kept in the Trinity Library. So this is the library of Trinity College. Any of you Star Wars fans, you know this is the Jedi Library, also in cinema. But this is a real library, which is in use and can be used by students today. Dublin's also really full of nice green squares. This is St. Stephen's Green, right in the middle of the city. And you can see from high up here that it doesn't have the same kind of old look as Edinburgh. The buildings look a bit newer. But you have these really lovely parks in the middle of Dublin. It's always one of my number one recommendations. Well, it's maybe my number two recommendation in Dublin. My number two recommendation is to have lunch in one of the parks and to people watch, because that's really when you see Dubliners getting on with their lives. And so Edinburgh and Dublin are also interesting because both of them have these big fenced in gardens. And they were made in the 19th century to support the Georgian houses around them. So these are what the kind of Georgian houses look like in Dublin. This is classic Georgian architecture. That means they were made in the Georgian period, so under the King Georges. And so these big gardens were made to be private gardens for the rich people that lived in those houses. And in fact, in Edinburgh, they still are private. So loads of them are still under lock and key. You can't access them. Therefore, the people who live in the houses around them, and only rich people live in those houses. But in Dublin in the 19th century, Arthur Guinness, who was the founder of Guinness, the beer. It's not really a beer. It's a stout or a porter, technically. But the founder of Guinness, the Guinness Brewery, he wanted his workers to be able to have a nice walk to work. And so he campaigned to have all of the private squares made public. And so it's thanks to Arthur Guinness that these are now all public parks. In one of the corners of St. Stephen's Green as well, you'll see this guy hanging out on a rock. This is Oscar Wilde, one of the very famous writers who's from Dublin. Maybe you didn't know he was from Dublin. But here's a statue of him. The house where he's born is just on the corner of this square. There's a couple of little sort of statues and plaques to him. And in fact, in Dublin, there are so many writers. Again, they've got a writers' museum. There's so many writers that there's this really nice tradition of these little gold cobblestones or plaques around the city where they'll have quotes written on from different Dublin writers, usually about the city of Dublin. So the idea is you're supposed to be walking around and you look down and you see them. So some writers that come from Dublin, you have people like Yeats, you have people like George Bernard Shaw. In the 20th century, you have Joyce. You have Samuel Beckett. You have Oscar Wilde. So yeah, a very rich literary tradition, and also often quite a rich literary tradition of sort of resistance and endurance and survival in the face of adversity, because the Irish people have obviously been through so much of that. That was 25 minutes I was talking. I'm sorry, that was a bit too long, but that was really an optimistic idea that I would be able to talk about this much stuff in so little time. So sorry if that was a bit speedy, but maybe do I stop sharing now and then I can see some of you guys and we can maybe have some questions? Hi, I'm gonna drink some water now.
So y'all, I think Lewis would love it if you would ask him. We don't have anything in the chat yet. Y'all can put a question in the chat, or Lauren has something.
Can I ask? I have a question also. Can I see? Ireland seems pretty poggers, says Eric. What does poggers mean? Scotland seems poggers too. Is poggers negative or positive? I feel probably negative.
It's positive. It's positive.
It's positive. What does it mean? Poggers. I never heard this.
It just kind of
very
means
cool, basically.
Oh yeah. Okay. Thanks. The one person I can see, do you have a question?
Lauren, did you have a question, or Lior?
Not yet.
No. We did have in the chat.
For Bradley.
Yeah, that's a good question. If anybody can't see it, Bradley's asking, why are the Northern and Normal Ireland not agreeable with each other?
I like it that you called it the Normal Ireland. I'm going to remember that one. That's good. I prefer that. It's a really complicated story. I'll try and super synopsize it. Basically, the English were always beefing with the Irish, like hundreds of years ago, beefing with them and also being really mean to them. Eventually, a bunch of the Irish leaders in the north, they got really sick of it and they left their homes, okay? And the English queen, it was Elizabeth I and James VI, were like, okay, quick, take that land. And they made the Ulster Plantation, where they took a bunch of English and Scottish landowners and they put them there, told them not to hire Irish Catholic people, not to treat them with any kind of civil rights, to try and make a chunk of Ireland that could be kind of more English in order for the English to then control Ireland. And in fact, it's a strategy which they developed, which they then used in the colonization of the United States, right? So the way in which the European colonization of North America worked, a lot of that stuff was trialed out on the Irish. You know, like, for example, setting up a place, trying to keep it your own culture, not let the indigenous culture take over, trying to spread your culture from there, maybe taking one group of the indigenous people and using them to control another. They practiced a lot of what they would do in the colonization of North America in Ireland. And so eventually you get to this situation where in the 20th century, so like the 19-somethings, people in Ireland are so fed up of English people, right? They want to be free, and they have this revolution in 1916 to kick the Irish out and to kick the Queen out. But there's this pocket in the north, okay, of people who are more loyal to the Queen. And so, to cut a long story short, they have a kind of treaty, and they're like, okay, you can have your freedom. This is the UK that say that. You can have your freedom, but we keep the north. I obviously, if I really had it my way, I could talk about that for 500 hours now. But that's the shortest synopsis I can do of why Normal Ireland and North Ireland don't get on. Max says, how amazing was it when McGregor won? Not amazing, not a McGregor fan.
Oh, Lewis, I think you got muted. Sorry.
If you go to the top corner where it says leave, there's a microphone.
Now it's good?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had a-
Alexandra has a question, and she said, "What do you think about the stereotype that all Scottish people play the bagpipes?"
It's not true. I actually only know one person who plays the bagpipes, and he's English. But sometimes when he's not in the UK, he does pretend that he's Scottish because people like Scottish people a bit more, I think, and that buys him something. But not all Scottish people
He's
play the
raping
bagpipes.
He's raping me!
Someone had asked about the unicorn being Scotland's national animal. If you can tell us where that came from.
Do you know what? I'm having a total mind blank. I can't remember. I'm going to be honest about that. But I always think that's quite nice. Or I always think it's a little bit like maybe representative of how people think about Scotland as well. But like this mythic, this kind of romanticization of Scotland, this mythical thing you can never really find. So I like that it's a unicorn. I can't remember why though. I'm sorry. Have you ever visited Aberdeen? And is there any notable history there? Yeah, my grandparents are from Aberdeen. So my dad grew up in Aberdeen. The whole side of my dad's family are from Aberdeen. Notable history? No, it's a big oil boom town. So now it's kind of expensive, and everything is made out of granite. So everything's very, very grey. In terms of big history, no, it doesn't have a lot of big history. It boomed big with the Industrial Revolution, so it doesn't have a lot of very old history. Is there a song or something about the unicorn song? I don't know the unicorn song. I'm sorry.
And then Ezra wanted to know what your favorite football club is.
In Scotland, you have to be really, really careful with this question because I don't know if you know this, but there's a lot of sectarian politics around football. So often in Scotland, what football team you support determines your religion. And I don't necessarily mean religion in necessarily a practicing faith, but because we're a lot less religious in Scotland than for example in the United States, but more your sort of cultural and social background. So in Ireland and in Scotland, there's been historically a lot of conflict between Catholics and Protestants. And in Scotland, which football team you support will tell you which of those religions you are. And so there's been for a lot of us, a lot of people in my generation and the generation above me, you learn that when someone on the bus says, "Here, pal, what football team do you support?" You say, "Oh, I don't follow the football," and then you do a smile. But if I had to choose one, Celtic.
Good. Hey, Angelina has a question that's perfect for you, I think, Lewis. She wants to know if there are a lot of immigrants in Scotland, and if so, where do they come from?
Yeah, so the biggest sort of immigrant population in Scotland would be people from Pakistan. There's a massive, massive Pakistani community. In England, it's very, very much people from India, so people from the Indian subcontinent. And this is to do, obviously, with a legacy and history of colonialism. But for some reason, a reason I don't really understand, is more Pakistani people than Indian people that have settled in Scotland. So Scotland it's not a recent immigrant community at all. It's like a 4 or 5 generation old immigrant community. So it's very, very entrenched. So Pakistani people are probably the biggest immigrant community. But actually, realistically, now in Glasgow, you have people from absolutely all over. You have like a very, very big Nigerian population. You have a big Caribbean population. You have people from everywhere. And it's from the year 2000 was when the English government, the British government in Westminster, started sending people who were seeking asylum from England up to Scotland. That started in the year 2000. And obviously since then, that has brought in a lot of people from various different places, which then brings their potential family links. And so the Scotland that we have now is a very, very different Scotland from the Scotland we had even 20 years ago, when it was certainly a lot whiter. But Scotland has quite an interesting relationship to migration and immigration. Scotland's a very progressive country. And so, for example, I'm sure some of you have seen that England have been on quite a specifically conservative vibe. So they've had conservatives in power for the last 10 years. A lot of the stuff to do with the Brexit was kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric. And I remember watching a really funny leaders debate where it was like the four leaders of the English political parties and then the leader of the Scottish political party. And basically all of the different English ones were kind of competing for who could talk the most bad stuff about immigrants. You know, one would be like, there's no more immigrants. And the next one would be like, oh yeah, me neither. We're going to be tough on immigrants. And then the Scottish one was like, the Scottish politician, he said, like, well, since all of the English politicians seem to not really like immigrants so much, I'll just say that we need you in Scotland, so you're all welcome north of the border. You know, it was on TV. And so, you know, the leader of the main political party in Scotland. And so we have a relationship to immigration. I think also because Scots people historically have migrated so much. And also Scots people, even at home domestically in relationship to England, have known also political hardship in lots of ways. And so I think people have a bit more of an open relationship towards immigration than for example, in England.
Great. I think we're running close to time, and we have another guest, one of our former students, Eduardo, who's going to talk to us. Nina put the form in the chat, but I want to give our last question to Ms. Camarillo, who is one of our geography teachers here. And she asked if you could, I don't know, this must be a geography thing or a history thing, speak to the dichotomy between a young government and a rich, deep, culturally historic people in Scotland.
I guess, I think if I've understood right, the question's about like the relationship between maybe more traditional political beliefs and then maybe where we are just now. Yeah.
I wouldn't say like political. I think my question was more in the sense of as a people group. It kind of goes back to what you were saying about immigration and how Scotland is now so diverse, not just in historical, but also in nationality senses. But as a people group, do you think Scotland as a country has a little struggle between these group of people who are more aligned with Celtic belief systems and more rooted in what old Scotland was and who they are and how they've now transformed into this new progressive, liberal, whatever they want to call it, country? Like, what's the relationship between the two?
I don't think it's even a clash. It's something I really appreciate in Scotland. Like, I don't think it's a clash. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I think even if I think people in general in Scotland, even people of a much older generation, even people who come from traditionally maybe more conservative social backgrounds, in general, people are very progressive and people are very like open-minded. And actually, it's like really, I don't know. For example, I live in France just now, right? And people I find very socially conservative here. And so I really see, you know, somebody looking different, whether that's to do with their race or their gender presentation or even like their hair or how they're dressed, in general can get quite bad responses here in France. And when I think about how that is in Scotland, it's really not like that. And actually, you could go to a really small town where people had never seen anybody that looked like you. And instead of people being threatened by that difference, I feel like even the old granny that you bump into would be a bit like, oh, I've never seen anybody like you before. You know, it's more of it's not, I don't feel like people are threatened by difference in the same way. I think Scottish people are quite open-minded in general, and so I don't know if I even necessarily see it as much of a clash. I think maybe there's an older generation that feel quite anti-establishment, and that matches quite well with a younger progressive generation. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. I hope so.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Lewis, for visiting with us today. It's very cool to get to talk with someone on the other side of the world, and you've helped fill in our map a little bit. I think everybody is going to walk away from this understanding a bit more about what that corner of the world is like. We have another special guest with us who's just going to talk for a couple of minutes. One of the things that we really try to do is make it possible for you to see how you could visit some other places in the world when it gets a little bit safer. And so, Eduardo, are you here with us right now?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, so I am so excited to introduce you guys to Eduardo Moller. Some of you might remember him. Maybe you were ninth graders when he was a junior or a senior. But
Yeah.
Eduardo graduated from Bel Air in 2018. He's a junior at the University of Houston now, studying political science with a focus in law and policy. He is hoping to graduate soon and move on to either law school or organizing and supporting community building efforts. He traveled to Greece and to Japan, and is just going to tell us a little bit about what that was like and how it shaped him.
Yeah, so I think the first one that we did was Japan. We went there in 2017, and I think that was like a big influential decision because I did live in Japan for 2 years for college, and then I transferred to University of Houston recently this semester. It's just really interesting to, I guess.
Oh, Eduardo.
I think he may have been removed from the call.
Hold on. Let's see if he
Yeah, that
pops
happened to me
back up.
3 times earlier.
Yeah,
Okay.
it happened to
I'm
me
so
about
sorry that
3
that
times.
happens.
I'm gonna
I
have to go
admitted
because I
him
need to
back
get ready
in.
for my guitar content hour. So
Okay,
sorry.
that's okay.
Thanks, Miss
Eduardo,
Chapman, for
are you
organizing
there?
this.
Eduardo?
Sorry, I was on mute. My bad. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, can you turn your camera back on?
I thought I did have it on.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
It's on, Ms. Chapman.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your experience in Japan.
I think that was probably where I just kind of like learned a lot more about, I don't know, like myself in general. And like traveling really does kind of like open up your mind to perspectives that you haven't like heard before. I know that's like a really obvious like thing, and like a lot of people like know that's gonna happen, but like when it really does happen, it just feels a lot more like rewarding, I guess, to understand people better. So if I had the chance, I would probably go to like all 4 trips. If I had like from freshman to senior year, I would probably like try to go to all 4 of them just because like traveling is really awesome, I guess, you know.
What was it like? So you went abroad for a little bit on our school trips, but then you moved abroad. How was that different?
A lot less scary than it would seem, honestly. It's just kind of like you're put in a situation, you just have to kind of deal with it. Like, yeah, it wasn't really scary. It was really exciting and really like cool to have been able to say that I have an experience where I lived in another country for 2 years already.
One thing that we noticed that a lot of students were saying they were a bit nervous about is being in a place where they don't speak the language. How did you navigate that? Was that a big obstacle to getting something out of that experience, or how were you able to still overcome that?
People I feel like would be surprised at how like easy it is to kind of just like not fake a Japanese accent, but just like speak like with gestures, just kind of be like over the top dramatic with like how you're gesturing and what you're doing, because a lot of the gestures, like if you need to do something, it's like just point at it, it's not a big deal. Like I think it's just you have to be afraid not to like make a fool out of yourself. Like you're gonna be looking kind of silly for a little while, so just navigate.
I think that's great advice, that you have to be willing to. And did people still want to communicate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. People like think you're like a funny little guy, like just around in the city trying to like get somewhere, and they're like, yeah, sure, I'll try to help this person out. I mean, obviously, I think like it works a lot better if it's someone that's like a lot younger, more close to your age. They get like really understanding of the situation that you're in.
Yeah. So what's next for you? Where else do you hope that you might get to travel someday?
I think the next place I want to travel to is definitely somewhere in Europe. I really liked how we stopped at the Amsterdam airport. I wish we would have spent more time there, but I know that's not possible. Yeah, I feel like my next destination, whenever all of this is more safer, is probably Amsterdam.
Very cool. Guys, did you have any other questions for Eduardo, a former Bel Air student who's been, abroad for a short time and a long time, about how he made all of that work?
I have a question.
Okay.
So, before you moved to Japan, did you take any Japanese lessons here, or did you take Japanese at Bel Air?
No, I did not actually. I kind of like went in completely blind, and I feel like honestly that was really beneficial. Actually, never mind, that's not true. I did try to learn the alphabet a little bit. I mean, specifically with Japan, there's like 3 of them. So I tried to learn like the simpler ones just to have like the most basic understanding, but I had never had like a conversation with someone in Japanese before. I had never had like any sort of experience talking to anyone. Yeah, I guess in Japanese. So it was kind of like being in that situation again. You're forced into it, so you're like kind of like sink or swim. Like you're gonna have to do this.
I have a question. What skills do you think you got other than like an understanding of Japanese culture, Japanese language, Japanese cuisine? Because I know that was a big thing for you. What sort of like life person skills did you come back with?
Definitely how to talk to people a lot better. Like I feel, I don't know if this is gonna be like kind of morbid or not, but like I really did see people from like all over the world, like just a lot of places where like, you know, shit is going down, I guess. Like Myanmar was here. There's people from Myanmar, there's people from like Sri Lanka. Just kind of like being able to speak to anybody in any sort of situation that they've been in. It's kind of like a really useful tool. Just the communication skills would be.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, go ahead.
Ms. Chapman mentioned cuisine there. What was your go-to food or I don't know, dish at a restaurant?
So at a restaurant, it would probably be something really simple that doesn't even like it doesn't really sound too Japanese, but it's called gyudon. It's just like meat on top of rice with like whatever, like maybe some green onions or whatever. But you know, sometimes they dressed it up interesting. Like I know this might sound gross, but like they had like Japanese mayo on it, and it was really, really tasty. If it was just like a quick thing that I had to get before class, it would probably be like something really not even like traditional Japanese. It would be I would go to 7-Eleven and get like a piece of fried chicken, which was like probably like less than $1. So that was probably go 2 meals.
Their 7-Elevens are amazing, right?
7-Eleven.
Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't right? Like their 7-Elevens have like gourmet food there, not like our gas station restaurant.
A lot of time dinner was 7-Eleven. It was just like you have $5, time to go to 7-Eleven, dinner time.
Hey, so y'all, I want to point out what Eduardo's talking about in terms of his experience going to college abroad. Bel Air has options, especially if like cost and travel is something that you're concerned about. Bel Air has amazing partnerships where you could go abroad for a year after you graduate from Bel Air and before you start college and have this sort of experience for almost any safe country in the world. So please talk with me. Not a lot of kids take up that opportunity, but it's definitely something that is available to you. Talk with me if that's something that you would be interested in doing. Any last question? I know we're getting to the point where some of you have other classes and content hours. Anything else for Eduardo or Lewis?
Hi, Ms. Chapman, it's Rosie. I had a last minute question for Eduardo. So when you went to Japan, you said that you didn't really know any Japanese formally. So how did schooling work for you in that sense? Like, did you have to be in like a sort of ESL class?
No, so actually the way my school worked was there was like the International Liberal Arts Center, and that was basically a program from the university that I was at that had all of their classes in English. So it was basically getting people from all over the world and just kind of like getting a better understanding of like sociology, and it was all taught in English. So that was like a really big plus. If I didn't speak Japanese and there were only Japanese options, I wouldn't have gone. That would have been that would have been basically impossible, and I would have just been like handicapping myself. And I guess there's a question in chat. Yeah, I did go to an international school, or like I did go to the international program of a private university in Japan. That's a better way to put it.
Eduardo, if there are students who want to talk a little bit more extensively with you about like how to make a year abroad for college work, would you be willing to maybe meet with them one-on-one or in a small group?
Yeah, absolutely. That works. I could do that.
Eduardo is one of the nicest people that I've ever met. So that would be great. Serena, I think I saw your hand pop up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question for both of you actually. I was just wondering like what y'all's favorite like I guess sight to see or what your favorite experience was, like something from the countries you visited or lived in that like is a must.
Ooh, that's a hard one. I guess if you want to go first, Miss Chapman.
Oh, wait, for me? Oh, I thought she wanted to hear from you and Lewis.
You should go too, though. You should go too.
My favorite, Serena, I've told you, my favorite is the Alhambra at Granada. It is like the most magical place. You're going to want to get married to whoever you happen to be standing next to. It's so romantic. The Alhambra in Spain is stunning.
I like where I am now on the Mediterranean coast. Like it's hot here. It's nice to swim in the sea for 9 months of the year. That and like some of the really big cities, London, Paris. Like I'm a big city person.
Is there a place in like Scotland or Ireland that you say would be your favorite?
My favorite in Scotland and Ireland. I don't know. Yeah, maybe Glencoe for the nature in Scotland, and Glasgow for like food and eating out and culture, and like Glasgow in Scotland for sure.
Gotcha.
Glasgow's poggers.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for coming out. I think we hit a record today with 231 people. So thank you to Lewis. Thank you to all of our teachers who invited their students. Thank you to you guys for asking such great questions. I hope you will join us next week for Peru. And our after that is going to be Egypt. And in next semester, we're also going to have some good ones as well. So thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. I'll hang back in case anyone has questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it me?
Oh, hey, Eduardo, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Sorry, I can't see you. Teams has been strange today. Yeah, Priscilla, I will, if your teacher requests it, I'll give them the recording for today. I'm so sorry you got kicked out like that.
It's fine. It'd be like that, I guess. I don't know.
But that was great. Thanks for sharing what your experience was like. I will take you for Japanese tea when it is safe, and you have to tell me all about the details of what it was like.
Sounds good.
I'm so excited. So you're going to graduate like next year. Summer, I think a lot depends on the next few months. I'm going to remain optimistic for that.
Mm-hmm.